In this example, I want to go ahead and take a look at what it looks like to create a complicated element in dynamic HTML. So I'm going to start with an HTML template, and again, titling it DHTML, and we'll have a script source, complex um, elements.js, and then I'm going to go ahead and have a script where I trigger the init method, and that's where we'll execute our JavaScript code. And just before we even get started, what I want to do is I want to create an element, and the element that I want to create is going to be a little more complicated. So I'm going to create a div tag that has a class of ABC, and then nested underneath it, I want to have a label. The label will be for my email, and then an input field, type equal to text, ID equal to email, and then value equal to, so I don't need a value there. I might have a placeholder, but this is the idea, is that I want to create this thing. I want to create all of those elements at once and put them on the page as separate elements. So I'm going to cut this because I don't want to start with this in HTML. I want to generate this in JavaScript, but I want to use this kind of as a guideline. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this out and save that. And I'm going to save it on the desktop. I'm going to create a new dynamic HTML folder. And I'm going to save this file as index.html. Okay, so here we are. And then I want to create this complex elements.js file. So I'm going to create that new file, complex elements.js. I know that I'm going to have my init method, so equal to a function definition. And inside of here, I know that I want to generate that HTML code that we were discussing earlier, so this div with a label and an input field nested inside of it. Okay, so let's start off by creating the div. So I'm going to create a variable called div container equal to document.createElement. It'll be a div. I need to set the class identifier, so div container dot set attribute ABC. Okay, and what that's going to give me, so we can just kind of walk along the path of creating this thing. So I start with an empty div tag. After I add the class attribute, I have an empty div tag with a class equal to ABC. Okay, but nothing inside of it. I want to next create this label. So this label has some text inside of it. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new label. So let email label equal to document.createElement label. Again, we have an empty label. We want to set the for attribute to email. And then we want to set the inner HTML, so email label.inner HTML equal to email. Okay, so let's build up these things. So we start with a label, we set the for attribute, and then we come back through and set the for attribute, still there, but this time we also add the inner HTML to be email. Okay, so now we have a div element, we have a label element, then we want our last element, which is this input type equal to text with an ID equal to email. So I'm going to go ahead and have this be my email text field equal to document.createElement. It's going to be an input field. So what that gives us is an empty input field. Okay, I'm just using a self-closing tag. I don't really have much control over whether it's a self-closing tag or not in dynamic HTML. In fact, I don't even have control over whether or not there is a closing tag. The reality is it doesn't matter. What's going to happen is the browser is going to generate the tag that it needs to render. So you really have no control over it, and you shouldn't worry about it, to be honest with you. So we have this text field. We need to set the type. So email text field dot set attribute type equal to text. And then we also need an ID. So email text field dot set attribute ID equal to email. And we can kind of build on our input field. So we have now an input field type equal to text. And then finally we have an input field type equal to text and an ID equal to email. Okay, so now we have all of our different elements all separate from one another. So as it stands right now, we have our div, we have our label, we have our input field, but right now they're all separate things. They're their own things. And what I want to do is I want to put them on the page as one big container. So what I can do is I could put the div onto the page. So we know that we're going to use the document body as the reference element. So I said I wanted to put it right inside of the HTML body. So I'm going to use the document body as the reference element. So document.body.append child. I'm going to go ahead and append the div container. And life's good there. And then once I have the div container on the page, I can add the email label and the email text field. And the way I'm going to add them, order's important here. Okay, so I want to add the label to the div tag, and that'll be the last child because the div container right now is empty. And then after I add the label, then I can add the input type equal to text, and it'll show up as the last child. It'll show up as an adjacent child to the label. So I need to add the label first, then the input field to my div. Okay, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to use the div container as my reference element. I'm going to append a child. I'm going to append my email label. And then I'm going to take the div container, append the child, email text field. Okay, and if we open this in a browser, okay, so for some reason I'm not seeing anything. So let's take a look and see what's going on there. And if I look at my elements, I'm going to expand this just a little bit, and you can see I have an error. That's not good. Failed to execute set attribute on element 2. 2 arguments are required. On line 10, so if I'm looking at this set attribute, this should be class to ABC. And then what we should see, if I look at our elements inside the body, we should see that div with our label and our text field, just like we wanted to create. Okay, so then one thing I want to point out in terms of how I created this and what I would suggest is probably the wrong approach is on line 20, I'm taking that div container and I'm saying, this is ready for the user to see. I'm actually putting it on the HTML body. And then after the fact, I'm coming through and I'm saying, okay, now the div container's on the page. Let's append this label. Let's append this text field. Instead, what I wanted to do was I wanted to append this entire thing as one element. I wanted this all as one big thing. And I didn't quite do that. And you'll notice that it's not really an issue. My browser runs so fast that this element shows up on the page and I don't see any lag. Like I don't see that the div went onto the page and then the label and then the text box. It all happens as one operation. But for consistency and to just kind of contextually understand what we're doing here, we want to create this whole div and then append the div to the page. I want to do that as the last thing that I do. So the div container exists. It's just a plain div. I append the label, I append the text box, and all of that is happening in memory. So the user doesn't see any of that. It's all happening in memory. So by line 22, in this case, I have this entire div built up the way I want it to look. And finally, on line 23, that's when I actually send it out to the end user to say, hey, take a look at what I've built. Here's the email field. Here's the text box. Okay, so all of it is created, and then all of it gets put on the page, all as one element. Okay, so complex elements, and really complex elements are no different than what we've dealt with in the past with dynamic HTML. So all it is that I'm creating an element in memory, and then I'm using that element as my reference element to append to, or I could also use my insert before or replace child or any of those other methods to position elements within the context of my HTML element. Okay, so div container is just a reference element, and it might exist on the page, or I might be creating it in code.